Hello, everyone. My name is Kurt Nemi. I'm the senior firefighter on Engine 611 here in Rapid River. And today I'm going to be covering risk management, piggybacking on the risk assessments that Noah talked about, the 10 and 18 that Colin just covered, and then moving into the actual risk management process and that cycle as we relate it to wildland fire. So Shelby or Mike, if you would be able to move that link for the video into the chat, that's the first subject we'll discuss. So everyone can view that individually. It's about a 15-minute video. Come up with any comments and questions. When we come back together, we'll talk about that. And then we can move on to the actual risk management process in the IRPG.
All right, just posted that link up there for folks.
Okay, those that aren't quite done with the video, we'll give you just a couple more minutes and then we will get started moving through the risk management process. And also for those that are done, if you have your IRPG handy, please pull that out. And those that don't have one or have it with you, please see the link that Shelby put in the chat for the electronic version of the IRPG. Okay, so at this point, hopefully everybody's done with the video. I'll open it up real quick. Any comments that anyone would like to make, or anyone have any questions about what they discussed in that video? Okay, so please open your IRPG to page number 1. Obviously, that's how important this risk management process is. Regular number 1, and that's in the green section. So discussing the second bullet point there on the PowerPoint slide, what tools we have as firefighters to manage risk. As I said before the video, we had in the past JHAs, and now we're moving to those RAs that Noah talked about and that we're working on converting for both forests. And additionally, the main one as firefighters that we have on the line or on the way to an incident is what's in your IRPG. So starting on page 1, you have the risk management process. You have those the 5 steps of risk management that they talked about in the video. 1, identify hazards, and that's building your situational awareness. 2, assess those hazards. 3, develop controls and make risk decisions based on those. 4, implement those controls. And 5, supervise and evaluate. And then on that 5th step, you have to ask the question, is this working? And you might have to reassess. If things change, which they do on the dynamic fire line, you might have to back up or go all the way back to the beginning of these 5 steps that you see here on page 1 of the IRPG. We're going to move along a little bit. Just as everyone saw in the video, we'll discuss the video as it relates to wildland fire. As I said, the pilots there on the Columbia Bar, very dynamic and dangerous situation, just like we see on the fire line. The pilots put risk controls into place to attempt to manage that risk. They had that briefing. They were aware of the ships, the country of origin, maybe the age of the ships, the weather in the Columbia Bar, and the river conditions as they related to current. That's just like we would do on the fire line. As you can see, the steps under each of the 5 in the risk assessment process in the IRPG, they're building their situational awareness. And just like they did, we on the fire line, we continue to monitor and reevaluate that risk. And we weigh that risk versus reward. Do we really need to be there? Do we really need to be doing that task? Just like they talked about, at some point they might have to shut down that bar, even if it meant an economic impact and having ships stacked up out in the harbor. They had to be willing to do that if the risk was too great. And that's just like Shelby talked about for wildfires, using that, how you can turn down an acceptable level of risk, and how you go about using that turn down process that Shelby and Mike talked about earlier. And the final point that I had from the video, I hope everyone caught, was that you're all peers in risks. All those pilots were all owners. No one was superior to others. And yes, we have different ranks in our chain of command in wildland fire. But as people said before, all people are in charge of safety for everyone they're working with. And so in that danger, in that risk, we're all peers out on the fire line. So that's important to reiterate again. If you see something, say something. You'll hear it constantly, and we really need to abide by that. Some other ways we can mitigate risk, as I just mentioned, the IRPG. We also have the JHAs and the RAs, and specifically for fire, we have the Interagency Standards for Fire and Fire Aviation Operations, otherwise known as the Red Book. Every fire module is going to have that. They should have that on their vehicles. Any militia firefighters that aren't familiar with this, and you can find it online. You could talk to any of the fire staff if you'd like more information on the Red Book. And also just came out recently here, the Chief's letter of intent for this wildland fire year. In her letter, she specifically mentions again items that were mentioned were very important last year. Stop, think, and talk before acting. Adopting that life first mentality, even though we're there to put out the fire, to try and engage in that risky situation, we need to always think of life first, the public, firefighters. Having that mentality first is the number one priority in the way that we can manage risk using that risk management process. We'll move now back to the IRPG page 1, the formal risk management process that they talked about in the video a little bit as well. So read through that page. As I said there, after step 5 or at any part during the 5 steps, ask yourself if it's working or if that can be applied to the current situation. If that checklist isn't working, you need to go back and reassess and start over. And that's going to constantly be happening on the fire line, or it should. So moving down to one of the subsections, the look, up, down, and around indicators. If everyone can please move their IRPG, flip to page 3. This is going to talk about some of those environmental factors. If people want to just read through this as I'm talking, and you can go through it in more depth. It's always good to review the IRPG before the season. So it's going to talk about environmental factors, fuel characteristics, topography, weather, some of the fire behavior, plume dynamics, the rapidly changing fire behavior. And this relates all back to what Colin talked about in the 10 and 18, keeping situational awareness and having those 10 and 18 in your mind and being able to apply them to what you're seeing on the ground. That's the effective way to manage risk. So as you finish kind of skimming through those, we'll continue on to page 5. And again, this all is a very fluid process, but it rolls right into common denominators, fire behavior on tragedy fires. Gathering that information. Relatively small fires are deceptively quiet fires. Light fuels, grass, herbs, and light brush. Uphill runs, critical burn period, 1400 to 1700. All those factors that were split up into what Colin was talking about on the 10 and 18. Continue on to page 7 in the IRPG. Another one of the items in the risk management checklist, LCES, which I'm sure everyone should be familiar with. Lookouts, communications, escape routes, and safety zones. Very important. What LCES is, if people aren't familiar with it or where it came from, is created by a hotshot superintendent, Paul Gleason. And basically he boiled down the 10 and 18 and came up with LCES as the most critical way to apply the 10 and 18 to risk management and to keep us all constantly looking at those 4 factors. So read below each of the headings there. Should all be very familiar with this. Again, review this on your own time. This is your refresher or continuing education for the year. Everyone should be reading through that. Just wanted to stress the final one there on the S for safety zones. Recent years, there have been some updates to that, especially as it relates to safety zone size and some of the convective activity, winds, and how that distributes heat based on topography. So down there in the very bottom in bold, notice upslope, downwind, heavy fuels, each means more heat impact and the need for a larger safety zone. And as wind exceeds 10 miles an hour or slope exceeds 20%. So those are some watch outs. And if you need any more information on safety zones, there's updated guidance on the NWCG website for that as well. Kind of just moving through the IRPG. We'll go to another item in the risk management checklist. So please flip to page 9, downhill checklist. And if you notice, downhill line construction was one of the watch out situations. And as you can see, they discuss it here in the first part of page 9. I highlighted here with a highlighter in my IRPG a while back. It should not be attempted unless there is no tactical alternative. And that's stressed because of the danger of constructing downhill fire line. And you'll notice further down, to even try to construct downhill fire line, you need someone that's qualified at the task force leader or IC4 or better position. So that's just another one of those almost watch outs within the risk management checklist as well in your IRPG. So please take a quick second, read the rest of page 9 on your own. And again, through any of this discussion, if you have questions, I'll open it up at the end and we can take comments and questions. Mike, at this point, could you please move us to the next slide in the PowerPoint? Thank you. Okay, so you'll see here on the next slide of Mike's PowerPoint, be safe, use the IRPG, and take no unnecessary risks. The biggest thing right there in the beginning, always do a briefing. That involves the risk management process and all the items on it, LCES, gaining SA, and assessing that risk before engaging. If you get a briefing and you understand it, and you can look at the briefing checklist in your IRPG again, you'll make sure that you have all the items that the chief's talking about in her letter of intent as ways we can mitigate risk and hopefully get everybody home safely this year. You'll see the next item below, document, document, document. That's not only for incident commanders. That goes along the lines of if you see something, say something. Writing down times of certain things, taking good notes at a briefing, whether you're a brand new firefighter or you're a 20-year veteran. It's impossible to remember everything. That's why they have this risk management checklist. It's a checklist. You can take notes right in your IRPG if you have to. There's notes pages in there. So document, document, document. Everyone has the right and obligation to pause operations until safety concerns are addressed. Goes back to what you've been hearing earlier in the presentation here. If you see something, say something. That's all of our responsibility. And then finally, this risk management, I thought this was a good graphic. It shows that it's a cycle and that it never ends. It's not just a checklist. like maybe linearly in the IRPG where you get to the end and all the boxes are checked and you're done. As soon as you get to the end of this circle, you're moving right back to the beginning, because you're going to have to reassess the dynamic situation, just what you'd see on the fire line. So I thought this was a good representation of that. So that's the best way I can describe risk management as I think about it, is a continuous cycle, and you might get halfway through and you might have to move back to the beginning and start your assessment again. You might not even get all the way through all 5 steps. With that, I will open it up to any questions and comments.